Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of the Bright Ideas Daily Nugget. I am your host, Trent Dyrsmid, and this is episode number 111, How to Succeed on Amazon Using the FBA Model. So in case this is your first time watching one of my videos and you don't know who the heck I am, let me first offer up a screenshot to show you what we accomplished in our first 12 months starting in September of 2016. As you can see, we did $1.1 million in gross sales, and we used the wholesale business model, which I'll put, if you're unfamiliar what wholesale is versus private label, I will put a link down in the description. And if you have questions about that, please feel free to use the comments down below the video. We had a profit of $169,491.87, which equates to about a 15.5% profit margin, which is a little thin, and our profit margin is actually much better than that now. However, for our first year, we were pretty happy to have accomplished that. So before I get into the tactics, the things that I specifically did to make that happen, and some of those things I'm going to drill deeper into in other videos, and I'll put links to those videos also in the comments. I want to talk to you how I got into this, because it was a little bit of luck, actually. So I have this podcast where I interview other people, and as a result of doing that now north of 250 times, I've gotten to know lots of different people in lots of different businesses. And two of those folks were selling on Amazon using the private label business model, which is essentially where you are looking on Alibaba to find products that you can then import and resell on Amazon. And for a number of months, they were both after me saying, hey, we're really doing well on Amazon, Trent, and you should give it a go. And at the time, my wife and I were running a digital marketing agency and had been doing so for about 4 years. Life was pretty easy. We had a big client, and life was pretty easy. But then the client decided that they weren't going to renew their contract. So I decided, well, I'm going to give this Amazon thing a shot. So I told my wife I was going to do that, and I started using the private label business model. And I've covered this in detail in other videos, but suffice to say, after 4 or 5 months, I really was not achieving very much success. We were having sales was around $25,000 a month, but we weren't making any money because I was having to spend so much on advertising. I think also that was the byproduct of the fact that I really wasn't very good at it. I made poor product selections. The two products that we chose to sell were essential oil diffuser necklaces, which are incredibly competitive, and the shock collar for dogs to keep them from barking, because we had a dog that loved to bark. Also a product that was too competitive. And I actually think years later I still have a few of those collars left. So I was feeling pretty discouraged, to be honest with you, at that point in time, and I really wasn't sure, where I was going to go from there. And maybe you can relate to that. Maybe you've taken a stab, so to speak, at succeeding on Amazon and not gotten the results in the short term that you wanted. And luckily for me, my podcast came in to save the day. I interviewed a guy by the name of Dan. Well, first of all, I interviewed a guy by the name of Eddie Levine. And Eddie was doing a different model where he would go to trade shows and he would source products at those trade shows and he would resell them. And that was working very well for Eddie and continues to, as far as I know. But he lived in hotels and on airplanes, and I thought, man, I have a family. I don't want to be away that much. So that wasn't very appealing to me. Eddie thankfully introduces me to a guy by the name of Dan Meadors, who was succeeding massively in wholesale. And I've interviewed Dan on my podcast, and I'll put a link to that as well in the notes, in the comments, in the description rather, down here on YouTube. And Dan barely traveled at all because he did all of his sourcing and using email and the phone. And I thought, man, that's it. I'm in. And so as soon as I hung up from doing that interview, I turned to my wife and I said, we are going to do wholesale starting today. And I'm very pleased to say that within 5 months of starting, we had our first month where we did over $100,000 in sales. It was actually January of 2017. We did $113,000 in sales. So suffice to say, compared to the results that I didn't achieve in the private label approach, wholesale for me had become quickly wildly successful. And this isn't my first business. I actually built a multi-million-dollar business and sold it back in 2008 by the name of Dyrand, Dyrand.com. It's still in business today. And so I was naturally curious, well, this wholesale thing, how big could it really get? I mean, is this going to be a business where, like my other business, I only get to $1 million or $2 million a year? Or is this something that I could maybe grow to 20 million, 30 million, 40 million or more? And I quickly discovered a couple of competitors, eTails and NetRush were two companies that if you spend any time looking at products and who the sellers of those products are, you quickly discover these companies. And both of those companies, including another one by the name of iServe, were doing all over $100 million a year each. So I thought, man, wow, this is obviously a very scalable business model. So I'm gonna just put all of my effort into this thing and see how successful I can become. I also saw wholesale as much, much less risk than private label, and I cover that in more detail. And in the interest of keeping this video short, if you want to know why, just go down to the comments or in the description rather, and there'll be a link to another video that explains why wholesale is so much less risk than private label. So now, what did I do? How did I make my business grow so quickly? So let's get into that, at least at a high level, and I'll also provide you some much more detailed resources that you can watch if you would like. So the very first thing I did was I took massive action. I didn't spend any time wondering, procrastinating, delaying, getting analysis paralysis. I looked at Dan's results and I thought, if he can do it, so can I. And I said, Dan, how do you do it? And he said, you got to find a lot of product leads and you got to send a lot of emails. So I said, great, that's what I'm going to do. So the very first thing that I did was, because I didn't want to have to do all the labor myself, because I knew that a lot of it wouldn't be terribly interesting and there'd be a lot of it. So I sat down and I documented all of my procedures. Like I did everything myself once, so I understood, what the heck was going on. And then I created standard operating procedures, which is a fancy way of saying a very detailed set of written instructions for each step of the process of being able to, because Dan told me I needed to send at least 100 emails per week to potential suppliers saying, hey, I'd like to open a wholesale account. I'd like to buy some of your product. Because he told me that the failure rate was going to be really, really high. Most of them would say no, or more commonly, the pricing wouldn't allow me to generate a profit. So you needed to it's kind of like a needle in a haystack. So I created all these procedures, and then I immediately hired virtual assistants from the Philippines. And these folks are very, very happy to work for $2, $3, $4, $5 an hour. Their written English is excellent. They're no problem to communicate with, and they are fantastic at doing what I think oftentimes is very boring work, the same thing over and over and over and over again. And being able to do all the grunt work to be able to send 100 emails a week required a lot of repetitive, boring work. And in the I'll put another link to a talk that I give where I literally, because it takes me quite a while, much longer than I have in this video, to explain every single step of my sourcing process. It's a very multi-stepped process, I guess is the best way to explain it. Suffice to say, we started to get results. The first month we did about $15,000 in September, and then I think it went up to like 25, and then it was like 40, and it just kept going up. And I thought, man, this is the coolest thing ever. And within 6 months, we were now doing north of $100,000 a month in sales. And so I decided that I didn't want to be the guy doing the sourcing anymore. So my job at that point in time was essentially making sure those 100 emails a week got sent. And then, as you might imagine, there's going to be replies to those emails and conversations that need to happen. And so that was me. I was the guy dealing with the replies to all of the emails that I'd sent, and those replies would lead me to discussions where I was filling out wholesale account applications or having a VA do that for me, looking at price lists, analyzing profit margins, negotiating for better prices, and ultimately going on through and making a purchase order so that we could bring in whatever that product was into our inventory. And that was all very much on me. And after 6 months, I decided I didn't even want to do that anymore. I wanted to delegate myself completely out of the business. So I hired another individual who now just simply stepped into the role that I was doing. I had all these documented procedures. And so there was definitely a learning curve because this fellow did not have a background in sales or anything that would give him a lot of communication, interaction skills. And so there was a little bit of a learning curve there for him. But that worked exceedingly well. And then over the next year, as the business continued to grow at 20% per quarter to a peak of $280,000 a month, I didn't have any day-to-day involvement in the business, and that allowed me to basically free up my time to focus on more learning and discovering new ideas and so forth. And I ultimately actually started another company now, a software company, which is not particularly relevant to this video, so I won't get into it, but there will be a link to that in the notes, because it's a software business that I started to house all these standard operating procedures that we and now many other Amazon sellers, because we sell these standard operating procedures to other Amazon sellers, so many other folks are using all of the stuff that I created. So that's it for today's video. Couple quick things. If you have a question for me, put it in the comments right down below. I do monitor those comments and I will personally answer you. The other thing, we have a very active Facebook group where it is populated by many other people who are selling in the Amazon wholesale space like I am. 60 or 65% when I last surveyed of the people are active in business and actually selling stuff. So it's a really good group to hang out with, and you can get to that. There'll be a link, but verbally it's Brightideas.co/Facebook. And then on my blog, I have a Start Here page, and the blog is just Brightideas.co, where it will introduce you to a whole bunch of free training resources. And if you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you could just smash that like button or leave a comment, or ideally, if you'd like to see future videos like this, go ahead and click subscribe. All right, thanks very much for tuning in. Take care. Bye-bye.